Superman Ride of Steel at Six Flags America in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, is one of the first Intamin hypercoasters. It gave enthusiasts a taste of what Intamin could do with a megacoaster. The coaster is a smooth ride with some powerful airtime, but it's also a flawed ride. But do those flaws hold it back? Compared to other elite coasters, yeah, but it's still a great roller coaster overall. Built in 2000 during Six Flags America's roller coaster binge, Superman is a mirror clone of Ride of Steel, the prototype Intamin hypercoaster that opened at Six Flags Darien Lake the year prior. It's no surprise that Six Flags would return to Intamin after such a well-received ride. It's the Six Flags way after all. So in 2000, Six Flags asked Intamin to provide two more hypercoasters, which would also be called Superman, one to Six Flags America and another to Six Flags New England. The version that went on to Six Flags New England would be a custom layout, due to the landlocked nature of that park. I still consider Six Flags New England Superman to have one of the best coaster layouts ever devised, and this coaster was a perennial contender for the best coaster in the world until RMC came onto the scene. In a cruel twist of fate, Six Flags America was penalized for having too much land available. Since there was so much free space available in the back of the park, Six Flags plopped down a clone of the Ride of Steel layout in their park without any modifications. The Darien Lake version was built over the water, and I think the layout makes more sense for Darien Lake when you consider that fact, especially the low of the ground sections since those feel like you're gliding across the water. However, I think I ultimately prefer the setting on the America version as it goes out into the woods. The one at Darien Lake runs alongside the road and park entrance while you're completely isolated on the one at America. Well, except for maybe some deer. It's not an uncommon sight to see them hanging around the far Helix, particularly after sunset. Speaking of that, this is one of the most underrated night rides out there. You can barely see anything after that first drop. Despite being the park's star attraction, Superman is usually a walk-on like many of the rides at Six Flags America. The only time I've ever seen this coaster with a wait was on a busy Fright Fest Saturday when the coaster was running just one train, as the other one was unavailable due to maintenance. Superman sports the original Intamin hypercoaster trains that are extremely open, but more importantly, these trains still have the classic Intamin T-bar. Well, sort of. The T-bar is still there, which is great for experiencing the airtime. But after accidents on the versions at Darien Lake in New England, the T-bar was modified into a W-bar. Two additional pieces of metal were added on the outside of the lap bar, and shin guards were added as well. The additional metal on the outside has no impact on the ride in my opinion, but I despise those shin guards. They're extremely stiff, and they can really dig into your shins if you're not careful. My recommendation is to pinch your legs inwards so you can position your shins in between the central bar and the shin guards. That way the shin guards aren't actually contacting you during the ride, and you're still secure. In terms of seat selection, I'm a bit torn on this one. The front has a far superior sense of speed since almost your entire body is exposed above the zero car. But the airtime is better in the back row. I ended up splitting my rides between those two seats because I couldn't decide which I preferred. Superman begins with a 180-degree turn and a 197-foot tall lift. While the height technically doesn't classify as a hypercoaster, the 205-foot drop sure does, and this drop gives some great ejector airtime if you're in the back. That's followed by a low-to-the-ground 90-degree turn, and it sort of reminded me of the blackout turn on Intimidator 305 on a much smaller scale. It's exceedingly rare for a megacoaster to follow the first drop with a high-speed turn like this, and the positive G's from the pullout of the drop, combined with the sustained G's in the turn, had me starting to gray out on every single ride. You then rocket over the second hill. If you're up front, you get some decent and sustained ejector airtime, particularly when Superman is fully warmed up. If you're towards the back, the airtime is just as sustained, but it's noticeably weaker. Superman then hops up into the first of two helixes. The entrance into this helix looks really gradual, but because of how fast you fly into it, it still manages to give a pop of floater airtime throughout the train. And before you even return to your seat, you are then thrown to the side from the laterals of the helix. The banking on this 540-degree helix isn't super steep, so it offers some decent laterals at the start. While this helix has a great sense of speed, it's not overly forceful. So if you're towards the back, the second half of the helix can feel a bit of a dead spot. After exiting the Helix, Superman careens over one of the most infamous straight sections of track of any coaster. On the Darien Lake version, this section's fine. At Darien Lake, you're gliding inches above the water, so it's a really cool visual. It's enough to make me forgive there for not being another airtime hill. I cannot do the same with the America version, as you're traveling across a wide open field. More than any other section of the ride, this is the one spot where I wish Intamin added another airtime hill rather than copying the layout verbatim. Like the Helix, you still get a good sense of speed up front, but this section is laughably bad if you're in the back. The only excitement is if you're riding around dusk and see a family of deer off to the side. Thankfully, the third hill is a return to glory. The entrance into this camelback slams riders with positive Gs. And then you're launched skyward with the best airtime on the ride. The rapid transition from crushing positive Gs to ejector airtime felt like a catapult. And the airtime is powerful, sustained ejector airtime no matter where you sit. The pull-up from this hill treats everyone to another dose of powerful positive Gs, and then that leads into the second Helix. While the first Helix was a downwards one, the second Helix is an upwards one, but in many ways it rides similarly. The entrance is a bit underbanked, so it starts off with some laterals. But the rest of the Helix, while fast, is devoid of any force. It's just as drawn out as the first one. And then comes the finale, which is pretty darn intense. It starts with this very subtle transition from the Helix to the S-Hill. The exit from the Helix dips down ever so slightly, so back row riders get a tiny pop of floater airtime. Meanwhile, everyone is treated as some strong positive Gs as you start climbing the S-Hill. Atop the S-Hill, everyone gets airtime, but it varies depending upon where you sit. Up front, the airtime is abrupt but shockingly weak for an Intamin hypercoaster. If you're towards the back, the airtime is just as abrupt, but it's a much stronger pop of ejector airtime. That's followed by the final two bunny hills. The first hill gives a wicked pop of ejector airtime no matter where you sit. But then you feel yourself decelerating. Why? A trim brake. Since the final brake run is so short, this trim brake is needed to help slow the train down. If you're in the back, this sudden deceleration causes you to slam back down your seat very abruptly. The second bunny hill gives an equally strong pop of ejector airtime up front, but it's a bit milder towards the back because the front of the train has already hit the final brake run and it's decelerating as you're going down the drop. And that ends Superman. One of the criticisms I've heard about Superman over the years is that this particular one can be very rattly. My ride up front was glass smooth in 2020, but the back had a dull, persistent rattle throughout. It wasn't rough or uncomfortable for me, but I definitely noticed it, so if you're sensitive to a rattle, I'd recommend getting most of your rides up front. So what would I rate Superman? I would give this hypercoaster an 8.5 out of 10. Superman does many things well. It has a great wooded setting, a nice drop, and several strong airtime hills. But this coaster's pacing isn't perfect. The drawn-out helixes and out-of-place straight track are weaknesses unless you're in the very front row. That being said, Superman is still the best attraction in Six Flags America and a very good coaster overall. It's a borderline top 50 steel coaster for me because its best elements are truly fantastic. I do slightly prefer the Darien Lake version though. I think the different settings ultimately wash each other out. Like I said earlier, the layout does work better on the water at Darien Lake, but I do prefer being secluded in the woods more at America. However, Darien Lake's ride of steel seems to run a tiny bit faster, and it has the basic T-bar restraints free of shin guards or side brackets. And then it goes without saying, I much prefer the New England version to both of them, but I think that's a unanimous opinion among roller coaster enthusiasts. So those are my thoughts on Six Flags America's Superman Ride of Steel, one of the earliest Intamin hypercoasters. What are your thoughts on Superman? Are you a fan of this ride? I would love to hear your thoughts about this ride down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate if you gave this video a like and consider subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.